Kartik, welcome. I'm very excited to have you here. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for the invitation. And interested to have a chat with you today.
Indeed. I mean, I've probably used your platform, close to 1 million times. So to me, you don't really need any introduction. But, for anyone listening, who are you and what have you built with Satsearch?
Sure. So my name is Kartik Kumar. I'm an aerospace engineer by trade. I studied at Delft University of Technology, and I specialized on the space engineering side, particularly on mission design and astrodynamics. So my background is kind of classical space systems engineering. And one of the things that I noticed as I was doing this work was that it was difficult for me to do the engineering work I was doing because of a lack of information that needed to be fed into the systems, the models, the simulations I was building. So what that really amounted to was, on one side, writing a lot of complicated code, doing simulation work, building models, and on the other side, spending hours and hours Googling for parts, components, subsystems, trying to get basic technical information, price information, etc. Why is this important? Because this is typically when you're doing early stage design, the kind of work that you do to try to assess feasibility of a mission, to down select concepts, kind of everything that fits inside this whole branch of preliminary mission design. And so that just felt very incongruent for me. On the one side, doing what I would consider, real proper engineering, and on the other side, kind of being a Google monkey searching for this information. So that led to essentially the start of this venture called Satsearch. We exist essentially to try to make it easier for systems engineers in the space industry to get their job done, particularly to remove all the heavy lifting in trying to get information about products and services that are available on the market. And so that's kind of what we do. We run an online platform used by thousands of engineers every month. And I'm one of the 3 co-founders of the company, and I'm very passionate about solving this problem because it's kind of an annoying problem. It's not a very sexy problem. But in a lot of ways, I think it's the typical kind of problem that needs to be solved for the industry to make a jump forward. So I feel like at the same time, it's sort of a problem that most people feel needs to be solved, but really most people don't want to solve because it's kind of a quote unquote boring problem to solve. I mean, we're not building any fancy rockets or satellites or anything ourselves. So it's kind of an interesting spot to be in, and a place in which I think I can say now a lot of people identify with the problem. And a lot of people believe it should be solved, and we're kind of trying to be the people solving it.
Amazing. But that's quite a change to your original backgrounds because it has nothing to do with astrodynamics in the first place, right? So how was that process of seeing the problem and then deciding it was big enough to make the jump and change your, let's say, in a way, professional focus completely?
Yeah, so I mean, it is a change in the sense that I don't run trajectory optimization algorithms anymore, and I'm not doing large scale Monte Carlo simulations for future mission concepts and things like that. But on the other side, it's not super far away because in the end, what we're trying to work on is the inputs to those simulations. So in some way, I'm indirectly still tied to that because I have to, keep a keen eye on understanding the simulations and models that people are building and understanding how to form the data in the right way to prepare it for kind of injection into those tools. So that kind of keeps me involved at a distance. But yeah, I mean, I don't get to run all these algorithms myself anymore. I've never really, I think, had a singular focus or passion on like one topic. So as much as astrodynamics is, something that I'm very passionate about and very interested in still today, I've always had, a range of interests. So I've never found it really difficult to get interested. I mean, most topics I pride myself in being able to be interested in. There's very few things that I think I could say I'm really not interested in. So I didn't find it that difficult to make this kind of jump. I think instead, for me, it's been a quest of trying to be useful with the work that I do. And, I went down the academic path, doing a PhD and things like that, and super fascinating, interesting stuff. But, it is such long-term effects that you're ultimately likely to see out of that kind of work that I felt that it just didn't fit with my personality. My personality is much more suited to quick turnaround, seeing the impact of your work. So rather than being drawn to this topic, I was drawn to the idea of building something, putting it in the world, and seeing what people do with it. And from that, just iterating and kind of watching and observing how people use tools that you build, and then trying to brainstorm around that, how you can improve it bit by bit. So that's at the crux of this. I think, the topic is super interesting. Astronomics is also super interesting, but underlying all of that, I think it's more the fascination with the idea of solving problems, watching people also use solutions that you build, that really captured me to do something like this. So anyway, that's why I don't feel it as such a big transition as, maybe it sounds like on paper.
Indeed. I mean, I also mentioned it because, after when someone typically when someone does a PhD, it's because, they want to become an expert in a particular field, and they've got, at least in theory or on paper, a very clear or at least a very clear direction on the field they want to work on. But, you made the decision to start a PhD, and then, in a way, right after, or well, during the process, started also on the side building a startup, which is not the direct opposite, but at least not directly related. But I see your point about wanting to be useful, and useful in a good way, by solving problems other people have. So very, very,
Yeah,
very
and
interesting indeed.
again, I think actually if you look at a lot of case studies, you see that it's not so uncommon that people who are doing graduate studies, doing PhDs, end up, in many cases, even abandoning it to jump into a startup, a venture of some sort. I think people who opt to do PhDs in general, from the people that I know, friends, colleagues that I've met, tend to be people who like solving problems, like solving difficult puzzles,
Mhm.
that are kind of creative by nature and are very determined, right? And those three
100%.
qualities, are actually very, very handy if you're going to start a startup as well. So I don't think it's not that uncommon to see actually people who start a PhD end up either after the PhD or even, as you said, during deciding to start a startup, because they're not a million miles apart. What is maybe a million miles apart is the environment in which you operate, right? So when you're doing a PhD, you're in an academic setting, and that has a different set of rules and processes and metrics and things like that than, let's say, the startup world does. But from an individual's point of view, I think the leap isn't that big. That's why you also see some of the biggest and best startups have been started by people who went through grad school, either quit early or completed it and then started a venture. If you look in Silicon Valley, for instance, many of the major companies that we know were actually started by people either during or after PhD programs. And I think that's also because the other way of thinking about a PhD is you have people who have a very clear plan and a focus and a direction, and they opt to do the PhD. And in that sense, the PhD becomes the apprenticeship that they want to move into academia, to become an assistant professor or a postdoc, an assistant professor, associate professor, full professor, right? That's kind of
Mhm.
the hierarchy uh, for that track. But you see a lot of PhDs also doing a PhD because they don't know what they want to do. And I think I might have fallen into that bracket, right? And that happens more often as well than you think. That you're maybe privileged as well, right? You've done a master's or a bachelor's. You've got options. You can kind of look around, and either because you've got too many options, you're not sure what to do, or because it feels like it's safer to just stay in the environment that you were in and you're familiar with, people end up doing the PhD. But then, the PhD program or the PhD process, I think, is interesting in itself because it teaches you, at least for me, taught me a lot about myself. And I think that is what comes with the rigor of a PhD program, is besides the actual science and the fundamental research you're doing, spending that much time singularly focused on a topic and having to push yourself to become an expert in that area really forces you to look at yourself in the mirror, understand like what do I like, what do I not like, what am I good at, what am I not good at. And so in some sense it's also not strange that you see a lot of people abandoning their PhDs after a couple of years, because they learn a lot about themselves and they realize, hey, what I've learned, like the PhD has been useful, I've learned stuff, and what I've realized is this is not what I want to do, it's something else. So anyway, just to say that those worlds are actually, in my view, a lot closer than it might look like.
That's a great comparison and a great explanation, because I haven't done the PhD. I know people and friends that have or are in the process of completing, and it's it's not oftentimes that you get to think about that in that way. So thanks a lot. Now I see that there might be a bigger connection, as you just said. But now moving into Satsearch. Okay, so how did you meet your co-founders? Well, before that, a step back. Before you started your PhD and before you started Satsearch, were you already thinking about building a space company at some point?
Absolutely not. So I had no idea what the future had in store for me, and quite honestly, even today, I don't really know what the future has in store for me. So I think I've always been quite bright-eyed and open to things, right? Open to opportunities, open to things that cross my path. I'll say it even starts with why I originally picked aerospace engineering to study, because even that wasn't with a great deal of conviction, except for one thing, which was when I was in my late teens, I was extremely passionate about Formula One. And so
Okay.
actually, I joined for aerospace engineering because I thought I would go down the aerodynamics route and become an aerodynamics engineer for an F1 team. So that was the big plan, right? And then, of course, you see where how life what path life has in store for you. So um, no, so I had no grand plan, no idea that I'd start a space company. Honestly, even today, I find it a little weird to think that I have a space company because I don't even think about what I do in that form, really. I think of it much closer to what I generally think about the things that I do, which is doing things that interest me with people that I like, that kind of push me and challenge me to learn new things, and having a bit of fun along the way. And I think that's ultimately what I've kind of indexed on when I've generally chosen to do things. Um, Prior to the PhD and prior to Satsearch, during my master's program, I had the big eye-opening thing for me was to do part of my thesis and my internship abroad. And I think that really gave me a lot of perspectives about how big the world is and all the possibilities that there are. And, I realized that, especially at that age, it's much more important to keep doors open than to close doors. And so I tried as much as possible to do that. And that took me to many different countries, many different opportunities, whether it was internships, whether it was jobs, companies, university, research, etc. So I got a flavor and a sense of a lot of different things, which I think is very important. And it's what I tell a lot of younger people as well as they're coming out of, let's say, university education is I think of it as, in some sense, a scientific process to gather as many data points as you can, because it's only with data and building that data set that I think you can really start making some decisions about what it is that falls in line with what you want, who you are, what you expect, etc. And along that path, I realized I like building things. That's one thing, and that's always been in me. I think even as a kid, I used to, when I'm a little older, I guess, than you. So when I was a kid, we still had desktop computers that people built, and you could buy parts and you could stick graphics cards and things like
Yeah.
that on your motherboard. So I remember going with my dad to computer shows and buying these things and building, and just the act of building like that and seeing things manifest as a result of your hands building things has always been something I valued. Right? It's always felt like useful, I guess, in some sense, and through that valuable to me. So yeah, during my master's, the experiences I had kind of gave me a sense of a lot of different things. I built things, I did things, but as you also do more things, you start seeing more problems, which is also interesting, right? You don't only encounter new opportunities, but you also encounter challenges that honestly it's hard to relate to unless you've actually seen them and experienced them. And so one of the big things that came out of that for me during my master thesis work was that I wrote a piece of code to do some astrodynamics research. It was all in MATLAB. I wrote it by myself, and then when I submitted my thesis, I think I had to put it on like a USB stick or something and give it to my supervisor. Until today, I think that USB stick is probably at the back of some cupboard somewhere, and nobody has ever seen that code. Nobody's ever used the code. I think I've even lost every record of the code. And so coming out of that, I felt this was just a giant waste of human effort, right? I spent a whole bunch of time writing this code. And then afterwards, as I spent some time coding and I'd learned a bunch of coding principles and things, I realized not only that, nobody's used it. So I don't even know if my code is correct. In all likelihood, it was full of bugs and, lots of problems in it. And nobody using it meant that I also didn't get to stress test it. So when I started the PhD, which, there's a bunch of reasons for that, but I'll skip that to not make this too long-winded. That was an immediate thing that I felt like, hey, I'm going to be writing a lot of code in this PhD. I want to do this differently. I want to do it collaboratively. I want to build something open, and I want to kind of, and so building was something I knew I gradually learned about myself. I like doing, but the other is I like pushing the envelope. I like ending up in places that feel a little uncomfortable. And so in this case, the uncomfortable thing was that the group that I was in had a lot of code that was also being shared by students, but one was really not following very much in the way of best practices for coding. And number two, was only restricted to a small cohort of people within the group. And so the radical idea I had was not only do I want to build code that gets used by other people, but the most extreme form of that is to make it completely open source and put it online and have everybody just have access to it. And so it took me about 6 months really to push people in the group to think differently and say, hey, why not? Like, instead of being default closed, can we think of code as being default open, especially in an academic setting where a lot of code is taxpayer funded? Anyway, so this is just an example of how I kind of tried pushing the envelope out of this. I ended up with, building with a whole bunch of other people in the group an open source toolbox that's now being used actually, for instance, by the group on the JUICE mission and a whole bunch of other applications. So I'm very proud that that came out of that effort, and it taught me that it's not always going to succeed, but if you push the envelope and kind of say, hey, I want to try to think radically differently and do something differently, you can maybe make a dent in the world. You can do something that actually has an effect. And so Satsearch really came about because of a desire to do something like that again. And it really came from the fact that I was at the time working in a small company in Milan on a European Commission project. I was leading a group to do a study on removing rocket bodies, so discarded upper stages of rockets that pose a big debris threat, right? And I was also in charge of the GNC part of the system. So one of the things I had to look for was LiDAR systems that we could potentially incorporate in the design. And I spent 2 weeks trying to email people, call people, getting absolutely no response, nothing that I needed to help me advance that study so that we could ultimately include that as an assessment as part of the paper that we were writing, the journal paper. And that stuck with me. I was like, look, it's hard enough building, a very complicated space system to do multi-target rendezvous for active debris removal. And instead of doing all the complicated maths and physics that come with that, I'm sitting stuck trying to plead with LiDAR companies to send me some information. And so that experience just stuck with me. And I was like, that just doesn't make sense. Like, if we're talking about landing humans on Mars and having commercial space stations and a lunar base and all this fantastical stuff, how can we have engineers like doing this kind of work? So really, that was the genesis of Satsearch, because I didn't have an idea of starting a company. I didn't even really have an idea of starting a marketplace or a platform like we have now. But at the time, I was in Milan, and one of my friends who I'd met during my studies during an exchange program was also in Milan, and he's one of my co-founders now. He doesn't have a space background, but he also enjoyed coding, and so really In an attempt to do something fun together on the side, we decided to sit together and see if we could just hack on a fun like weekend project. So I remember we sat together for an evening and we wrote down all the ideas we had, which by that time I'd done a bunch of hackathons and things like that. So I'd kind of understood that a good way to list stuff out was to look at what kinds of problems you encounter on a daily basis. And so I sat down with him. I still have that list somewhere. It was like 11 or 12 of these problems that we wrote down, that
Amazing.
original list. And in fact, the problem of finding information as a space engineer was not number one on that. There was another problem that was number one, and in fact, so we started with that. We thought, let's do that problem. And in fact, we spent a couple of weeks doing that, but there was a third person required for that in the team, and we had that third person on board. But in the end, that person couldn't commit the time. And without their expertise, it was difficult to imagine building that. So really, as an attempt to say, okay, the first idea, we didn't really get it very far. And we were scheduled to go to a hackathon together in Bremen for a weekend because we thought that would be a good
The space
exercise.
startup weekend, right?
Yeah, exactly. And that was just an exercise to do this weekend project. We thought it's an excuse to put ourselves in an environment where we hack on this project, whatever we're sorry, whatever we're going to do. Let's do it at the space hackathon. And by the way, that original list of ideas didn't only have space ideas; it had all kinds of ideas. Some pretty crazy ideas that I might get back to later in my life. But at least for the space ideas we had on it, we thought, okay, if we pick a space idea, then we can go to this hackathon and it'll kind of force us for a weekend just to work together and have some fun. And so the first idea on the list is the one we were originally going to do. And then we were 1 week out from that event. And then we realized the first idea we weren't going to be able to do. So really, to scampering at the last minute, we switched to the second idea, which was, hey, why don't we just build a website with a component database attached to it and just make it easy for people to search for stuff in the database? And honestly, that was supposed to be like literally a weekend project. We'll spin up a website, attach a database to it, fill it with some stuff, put it online. And we were prepared to say, okay, and then we'll move to the next idea. Then we went to this hackathon with that idea, and I went up at the beginning where people were pitching ideas, and I pitched this idea. We gathered a group of people who were interested to work on it. And in a matter of whatever it was, 72 hours, we worked on it. There were lots of space engineers at the event, and we kept hearing, yeah, it's a pain to find this information. I'm always, struggling to keep the information up to date, and no easy way to store it. I have folders in Dropbox or whatever that I share with my colleagues, and I have a spreadsheet. I have blah blah blah. And then so that gave us some momentum. We built the first version of the website in 24 hours. We put it online, and we immediately had users on the website. So we were like, kind of crazy. We built a website. People are using it. People are telling us that they're facing this problem every day. Then we pitched at the end of the startup weekend, and we got the second prize, which was nice. But actually, the thing that really kind of cemented that we wanted to do something with this beyond the weekend is somebody at the event, person that actually awarded us the prize, kind of while they were awarding it to us, said, "Oh, very nice idea. Of course, kind of like only students and sort of space enthusiasts will use this. No serious professionals, no big companies will ever use this." And I was like, okay, like now you're challenging me, and I don't really believe that. And so that kind of like kicked into gear, I think, the last element of what I needed to feel like, now I want to prove you wrong, right? Like either I want to do this idea and understand why you're saying that, because I don't understand why. So maybe you're right, but I want to figure that out for myself, why, or you're wrong, and I want to prove to you that you're wrong. And here we are 10 years later.
Amazing.
So there was no idea of starting a company. It was just literally that. It was a little bit on a whim. It was somebody kind of challenging us. It was that initial traction, people kind of telling us, hey, this is kind of interesting, people using, the very first version of the website, which was a very crappy website we built in 24 hours. That's all it took. And then we were like, okay, like we had no business model. We had no financing. We had no idea what this was going to be. It's simply that like irritation of this problem exists. This person's telling me that people like serious space people will never use it, while all these other engineers at the event are saying, yeah, this kind of sucks. I waste my time doing this. And we built a prototype version and people are starting to use it. So that mix of things just in my head meant I'm going to give this a go. We'll see where it ends up.
But to many people, like I imagine people thinking without a clear business plan, you shouldn't build anything. So in your intuition was right in that there was something that you could build on that area. There was a problem to solve, and that you could make money and build a sustainable business. But logic would have said otherwise, right? In that there's no clear business plan, there's no clear direction,
No,
there's no clear
absolutely.
growth.
In
And
fact,
that's
we really
amazing.
struggled. No, but we really struggled as well. It took us 4 years to find our business plan. So I don't recommend what I did unless you're willing to kind of quasi suffer for those 4 years, because it was 4 years of really living on absolute minimal means, and no salary, no nothing, right? So it's a hard 4 years. Now things are up and running and things are touch wood going well. So, but if I think back to that time, it wasn't an easy time. So no, it's not the most logical way to do it. Maybe it's not even maybe recommended, and it's not also viable for everybody. So there was a bit of privilege for me in the sense that I could move back into my parents' home. So one of the
Yeah.
ways that I cut essentially all the costs out of my life was, I was like, if I'm going to do this, then I want to cut my personal burn to virtually zero. So I'm just going to move back into my parents' place. Some people don't have that option or don't want to do it. So I think that's why even with these kinds of stories, what I think is most valuable to take away from these stories is not the recipe of how to do something, because everyone's story is
Mhm.
so unique. I think it's more the sense of possibilities, right? The idea that there are things that are possible, and that if you so desire, within the constraints in your life, within the opportunity set that you have, you can push the boundary. And I think that's more, let's say, I would say the more, yeah, the valuable thing. Not necessarily in just what I'm saying, but when I hear other people talking as well, that's what I take more out of it, rather than the very specific, oh, you did this and then you did that and then you did this, because that's very circumstantial in the end.
Indeed, indeed, and I think a good something I can easily relate to and learn from your story is that, like, what I think your first attempt to become an entrepreneur, which I like to call intrapreneur, in that you tried within your research department to do things differently, make things differently, and start that open source project, which now has grown to be a massive open source project. And in a way, to me, that's a way of building things. It's not a company, it's not a side hustle or whatever you want to call it, but it's a project that, because of your initiative, has kicked off and is now operating, right? So that's also a way of starting to practice the habit of building things.
Yeah, and I think, look, it's just, for me, it's kind of hitting the jackpot if you get to do both of those things simultaneously, which is to build something that you're very curious about, that you want to see, enter into the world and see what impact it has, and simultaneously find a way to earn money from it. I mean, I think that's just that is what makes startups hard, is because typically you can have one or the other, but finding both of those things is where the to some extent the luck lies as well, right? Like,
Yeah.
honestly, when we started back in 2015, 2016, the idea of building a digital platform to do all of this stuff was absurd, right? Like, this wasn't the way we did things in space. It wasn't necessary. But look, 10 years later now, everyone's talking about like digitization to improve operational efficiency, resiliency, to monitor supply chains, blah, 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 right? So there's lots of the stuff that's happened. And sometimes you need also the luck of being at the right place at the right time. I think, one of the things is the reason it took us, I think, those 4 years to find that business plan, among other things. There's a bunch of reasons, but one of them is 2015, 2016 was actually a little bit too early for us to start this project.
Yeah.
And we just kind of had to bide our time until the world caught up with it. And sometimes the world might not catch up with it, right? And then you're unlucky. We got lucky, and I always say, it's a bit weird for me to say, but the actual singular event that was kind of lucky for us was actually a disaster for the world, was COVID. Because COVID changed the way people think about like digitization, digital platforms, working remotely, and that had an appreciable effect on our business as well. So yeah, when I look back, it took something like that to enable us to find our feet and really build a sustainable business around this. And that doesn't always happen, right? It's not guaranteed. Satsearch isn't also the first project that I tried getting off the ground. There are other projects that I tried doing. There was a space company prior to that that I tried starting with a few of the other PhDs in the group. There was a project for monitoring the health of plants. So like just plants
Oh,
you have in
wow.
your living room and your house and stuff. I was interested in kind of IoT, deploying sensors and building an app around that. So I had failures. I guess I had the fortune of catching myself before I went too deep in those ventures, so that the quote unquote damage of how those things not failing wasn't big. In fact, I learned a lot from them. It sharpened my view on what are the basic ingredients you need to get a venture off the ground. One of the most important ones is to like the people that you're going to be working with, because it's a long stretch. It's a marathon. So that's why I approached this friend of mine who's one of my co-founders, and my other co-founder similarly. I approached him and I was like, look, I think, it would be great if we work together on this. And yeah, and I've now worked with them for 10 years, and we have a very, very strong bond because we challenge each other. We don't always agree on stuff. We have arguments and things like that, but in the end, I think we deeply understand each other. And I've come to learn that that's one of the most important ingredients also to build a lasting business, is to really like the people that you're working with. So these kinds of like things you learn along the way.
But I imagine those first 4 years weren't easy, even on that front, because managing the expectations of the business can be difficult, because you might want it to start producing and start becoming sustainable at some point, but as you said, time and the market may think otherwise, and sort of keeping the expectations of the three co-founders aligned is very difficult. I would say, well, people say that it's often one of the most difficult things, right, of building a company.
I mean, I would absolutely agree. That is why I'm over-indexing almost on the team,
Mhm.
right? Like you have to. I think if you want to really give it a good go, and look, there are many ways that you could do this. So there'll be examples for everything I say. There'll be a counterexample, and that's the richness of this landscape of startups. So I think there's very few universalities that way, but by and large, I think building something together with people that you really have that depth of understanding and trust and willingness to like do the hard thing with, that's what makes the difference. And yes, in those 4 years, there are very many moments in which we were questioning ourselves, like, should we do this and should we do that? And what's really nice to have is people who have complementary personalities, complementary skills, of course, as well. Um, but what that means is, if I'm down and my co-founder's feeling, one of my co-founders is feeling stronger, then I can lean on them a bit, right? And they can kind of
Yeah,
help pull me out of that maybe situation I'm in, and vice versa. When they're then struggling, I can be the one that's like, hey, like, look, I'll trust me, or like I'll take the step, or I'll make the moves that are necessary. And in the two co-founders I have, I think I've just somehow lucked into two people that I can really like relate to at that level.
that's that's very in that sense, that's a very good decision that you make in choosing in building that team. But now moving slightly, forward, how does Satsearch make money, and how was the process of finding out, of discovering how to make Satsearch sustainable?
Yeah, so the process was really hard because we had no idea how to make money with this thing. All we knew was that day by day, as we built the platform up more and more, we had more users using the website. We had more people giving us feedback, wanting new things. So that part of the business, let's say the traction part of it, felt really good, right? Like you built something and people were using it, and then they were giving positive feedback, and you could continue building. It's just then you have this whole question of, but somehow money has to attach to this equation somewhere. And there was no easy answer to that. I mean, it was also not easy because the kind of business that we were building involved two stakeholders rather than just one. So we had the people using the website, which are typically engineers, and then we had the people who had parts, components, subsystems, services, etc., that they were selling that were in our database. And then aligning those interests and trying to figure out which of these two stakeholders have the willingness to pay, the problem associated with it, blah, blah, blah. I mean, it just took a long time. In fact, mid 2018, or actually towards the start of 2018, this is why, as we were trying different things and kind of getting stuck, we decided we'd apply to the ESA Business Incubation Program. So we kind of started preparing for that, talking to people early 2018, and then we applied and we got in mid 2018. And we got in with the plan. The program is nominally 24 months, that we were going to use the 24 months to find a business plan or to conclude that we were going to shut down the platform. So
Wow.
we put ourselves on a shot clock because by that time, we'd been running it for a couple of years and we really just hadn't made a cent yet and we just didn't know what to do. And so we were playing with like, does this just end up being like a hobby thingy on the side and we need to go find jobs? Do we? And so we all declared like, look, we don't want to look back in the future and regret not having given it 110%. And so we thought, okay, the ESA program would be an opportunity and a launchpad to do that. And so that's what we did. We spent 24 months really focused on that. And then we tried a whole bunch of different things. And halfway through the program, we more or less cracked it. And what we cracked was, and this came from a little bit of instinct that we had. My original thinking as well was that being an engineer, that was the side I empathized with most, more than, let's say, the other side of the platform in the beginning. And so I understood, look, life is hard enough for engineers. You face lots and lots of deadlines. You've got lots of pressure. You have PDR, CDRs, all these reviews to endure. People asking you stuff all the time, and honestly, generally, you also don't have budget, right? Like somebody else is paying your salary, you're not in control of spending any money or whatever. You just need to get the work done. And so it felt instinctively wrong to try to charge engineers for access to the platform. Moreover, part of the idea was, and I was frustrated by the fact that the space industry was so obscure, and so the slightly radical idea that came from the work that I'd done on open source software before was to say, hey, like open source seemed to have an effect in that realm. What if we thought of this as an open source thing? What if we open sourced the global supply chain? What if we made it such that any engineer that anywhere in the world that wanted to find information relating to space products and services could just do it, right? There was no restrictions, no barriers, nothing. So having that mentality, there was no way of really thinking of charging engineers, right? Because even charging is
Yeah.
placing a barrier. So that immediately meant we had to look on the other side of the platform to charge because those are the only two stakeholders. So then the difficulty started, which was trying to understand the business of a supplier. Like, how do they operate? How do they think about the money that they spend? How do they think about how they acquire customers? How do they think about conversion rates and funnels and all of this kind of stuff, which was quite new for me at that time, being an astrodynamicist. This was all like new stuff, but that's also where I found my challenge, right? Was to learn this new discipline, learn this new area of expertise. So we went really deep on that, and what we realized is suppliers spend a lot of time and energy and money trying to get their products and services in front of potential buyers. The most classical example of this is if you look at trade shows, exhibitions, conferences,
Yep.
right? Our industry is full of them, and people travel all around the world, and suppliers spend quite a lot of money, not just sending hardware, setting up booths, but sending people, flights, hotels. If you put all of that together, it's quite large spend. And the question is, can you do other things with that spend? Or can you complement that spend to try to achieve better and better results for these suppliers? And that's when we realized, look, what's very well established is going to events like this and meeting people in person. But we we sort of stumbled into the fact that the space industry really didn't know that digital existed, that the internet existed. And the way that that represented itself was that a lot of companies had pretty bad websites, right? And even today, space
Yeah.
companies don't always have the best websites or the easiest websites to navigate if you're an engineer. They might be super flashy, might have nice graphics, or if you're an engineer and you have a job to do and you're like, I just need to get this reaction wheel or this thruster and I need this information from you. Supplier websites are not always the easiest to navigate. It's gotten better over the last 10 years as people have recognized digital as being a channel. But that's where we saw the opportunity. We said, look, what if we introduce to suppliers this idea that digital could be a channel for them to operate in? And the fundamental thesis under this that we've since, I think, proven quite robustly is when I was doing this work, I was spending a lot of time searching online in Google. And so the hypothesis was if I'm doing that, maybe there's lots of other engineers searching in Google. And if you search in Google, there's not a lot of great content. And, there's a lot of words that are confused. If you search space, for instance, space means lots of different things. So there's a lot of
Yep.
ambiguity. And then if you search very specific things, like 6U CubeSat reaction wheel, at least at the time, the content on the web was really not that good and not that well indexed by Google. So that's where we saw the opportunity. We had the idea, I was lost kind of searching Google. Maybe there's lots and lots of other engineers lost. And if we can conquer the Google game, if we can figure out a way to build a website that shows up results every time an engineer searches something like that and shows them something that they want to see, then we can bring this audience to our platform. And that's valuable to suppliers, right? Because somebody's searching at Google, 6U CubeSat reaction wheel. You talk to all the reaction wheel manufacturers out there in the small sat world. They want to talk to that person. So that's what we realized the opportunity was. And so that's in the end where we ended up monetizing. And so the way we monetized, without necessarily going into all the details, what we built out was essentially a membership program for suppliers. And so suppliers can list on our platform for free because we also realized engineers need to get access to as many of the capabilities in the market. So we don't want to gate that. So we had to think of like added value things we could do for suppliers on top of that. So we have an analytics engine. We have insights for suppliers. We do some marketing work with them, etc. So that's what we could package into kind of a paid program, and that's what operates today. And within that, we're constantly evolving as we're learning from our customers where their challenges lie, what are the new things that they need, etc. So yeah, that's now the fun thing is that we've got this group of customers, and we've got this group of so customers to us are the suppliers, and then we've got the buyers on the platform, and we have really a lot of people who we can talk to and really understand like what do we need to do to make the platform better, to make your work easier, etc. And so that's how our roadmap is now built out. It's just constantly talking to both sides and trying to figure out how we can enhance their experience. And as we do that, we build out more and more monetization opportunities as well.
And how it's a big evolution as you rightly described, but how was the process of getting the first customer?
Not easy.
Because yeah, exactly. I mean, convincing the first one, it's the most difficult thing because
yes, the second one is slightly easier. The third one is slightly easier than that. The fourth is slightly easier than that. Of course, only in like a conceptual sense, because every customer,
exactly,
has their own requirements and things you have to think about, etc. But from a personal point of view, just getting over that hump and demonstrating I can sell, we can sell, and there is actually somebody who cares enough to pay for this thing. That's hard, right? And that took us, as I said, it took us 4 years to get to that place of being able to do that. And look, this is the other thing. You need early customers are very, very special people. And our very first customer, the CEO at the time who signed off on taking this leap of faith and starting, as a paid customer with us, I will forever be thankful to him because he did it on a bit of vision, faith, belief, but also a desire to support something new, right? And yeah, that's you have to get lucky sometimes also to find those people, or you just build something that is so crazy good and everyone wants it. But
of
we're
course.
also in a niche industry, and figuring new things out. We're first-time founders, so for us it was really a blessing to have somebody decide that it was worth taking that leap of faith with us. And to get to that point, yeah, a lot of rejections, a lot of people, sitting on the fence, a lot of sleepless nights, a lot of wondering, what am I doing? Is it me? Is it them? Etc.
Yeah, and am I in trying all channels possible, right?
Yeah, to trying absolutely everything indeed. And look, that was the one thing we said is that we will quit this project once we have tried everything and we have no more ideas of what to do. But so long as we have an idea of what to do, we will keep doing it if finances permit, etc. That took us through that first 3.5, 4 years, and today that's also what's taking us forward. Is we're always thinking about what is that next idea, and figuring out a way to execute on that. And the interesting thing about business is you really find something that you're passionate about and people that value what you're doing. There's almost always a next idea because they always have something that's ancillary to what you're doing today that they're interested in that you can explore. Not necessarily saying everything turns into gold, but it means it feeds the innovation machine. Let's say you're constantly sort of saying, hey, like, oh, here's a little alley we can maybe turn into there, or here's a
Mhm.
small right turn that I didn't realize we can try there, and that keeps things fresh. Keeps you sort of focused on growth and figuring out how to serve your customers better.
Okay, and now this was the turning point was the business incubation program, and after that, COVID came, if I'm not wrong, and
So actually, it happened during the program. So our 24 months was mid 2018 to mid 2020. COVID had
okay,
hit already during the first part of that. Um, but yeah, so we were kind of in the at the towards the end of the program, wrapping things up. We had by that time like gotten our first set of customers, and then just what happened in 2020 is that just accelerated because suddenly a lot of companies were stuck with the fact that they couldn't travel to these exhibitions and had this marketing spend, and so we could kind of latch onto that and so we started getting actually suddenly a lot of inbound where for the first 4 years it was all outbound, contacting people and trying to get them interested. Suddenly in 2020 we started getting people reaching out to us, and I can't tell you as a founder how exciting that is when people want to talk to you. Because as a founder, you want to talk to people and you want them to think it's valuable to talk to you. So when you suddenly get an email from them and they're like, "I want to talk to you," wow, that's kind of crazy.
I can imagine, and then after that, it was just continuous growth until today, right?
With a lot of ups and downs. I mean, there's no.
I can
I don't
imagine.
think there's any story that's just continuous growth. Maybe there are some cases, but I think the typical business will never be like that. So it's always a roller coaster. There's always things happening that you have to deal with. But yeah, I mean, since then it's been the secular trend has been growth with a lot of ups and downs.
How have you, because you started Satsearch in 2015, 2016, and that's the moment when SpaceX first recovered the Falcon 9. And to me,
Hmm.
those are the years in which the new space industry was was born in a way, because the fact that SpaceX recovered the main booster, dropped the launch cost,
Price
and
so
then
much. Yeah.
allowed many people to start their own companies. And I think we've seen a boom in Europe. How have you seen that growth? Because I guess new companies are more modern and they would adapt faster to, let's say, advertising, or you know they would jump faster into Satsearch, right? Into calling you and say, hey, we've got these components. Help us help you reach more people, right?
You would think that, and there is some fraction of that, but look, we are still in a very, very conservative industry. So it's hard because of that. Because what I've realized over the last 10 years, the hardest part of the problem that we're solving, which we had absolutely no idea when we started that, we were at the original hackathon and, started thinking about this idea. It's not technology, it's not business, it's not process or operations. The biggest challenge that we're faced with trying to solve or quote unquote solve or change is culture. And that is the culture within the industry. So look, today it is definitely easier than it was 10 years ago for us to have this conversation with people about, using a platform like ours to help drive their engineering and procurement or to drive their marketing and sales. But it's not a slam dunk. It's not obvious. And that comes from the fact that people are still not entirely sure how to think about the evolving space market. And look, I think that is a consequence of the fact that the market is kind of chaotic. And what I mean by that is we're not truly in any sense a commercial market. Like I think there's an ambition to be commercial, and people talk about the market as though it is commercial today, but I can tell you just from our boots on the ground work every day, working with buyers and sellers, it would shock you how not commercial the market really is. And what I mean by that is, if you look at the hallmarks of what you would consider very commercial markets, space is still a long way away from that. And it's not a surprise, right? That's not because anybody's necessarily doing anything wrong. It's just the market's changing, and it's changing from what used to operate in a certain way towards something that hopefully in the future operates in a different way. And that transition period is just going to take time. You're right that that 2015, 2016 period, of course, the Falcon 1 landing is one of the most seminal aspects of, that era. But, I think that there's something else. There was something in the air. You also have to think about the fact that 2008, we'd had the great financial crash.
Yep.
So 9, 10, 11, people were recovering. Then you started seeing 11, 12, 13, these startups pop up, these internet startups, etc. But the job market was still kind of difficult for a lot of people. And I think by the time you get to 14, 15, 16, people were like ready to try something, like we'd come out of that depression era
Yep.
maybe, or the crash, and there was a little exuberance, like we survived that and we're here, but people still, maybe the job market wasn't great. People were not necessarily landing all the jobs that they wanted. And then venture capital, kind of was also available again after that crash. And it just, you'll get these moments, right? These are the moments in which, and it happened after the dot-com bubble as well, right? If you look at the years
Yep.
after that, like 2004, 2005, 2006, it's very similar. That's when you had this huge rise in startups that many of them are iconic names that you encounter every day in some form or another. So I think 14, 15, 16 is very similar to that. It was just a period in the world, I think, also. So SpaceX maybe doubled down on that and made that much more critical, that period, all of this was happening. But I think even without that happening, you would have seen, because if you look now at the founding dates for a lot of companies that are sort of at some level of like maturity, maybe an SME now, maybe 50 to 100 employees doing
Hmm.
X in revenue, many of them, if you look back, they started 10 years ago. And I don't think it's a coincidence. I mean, I could name a bunch of companies, but without naming them, I think if you look up a bunch of companies, you'll see that
Yep.
many of them were formed in that time period. And I think that's not a coincidence, right? I think the world also goes in waves often with these things. And it just happened to be that that was sort of a crest of a wave at that point. It's also, I think, what is now difficult because that wave crested with an expectation that the space world would be in a certain place today. And through a variety of things, other things happening in the world, that has and hasn't happened. Certain things have happened. Like we have now, a very regular thing that SpaceX is doing, right? Is launching
Yep.
Falcon 9 and landing boosters, which 10 years ago, yeah, I mean, we didn't know that that was going to be a normal thing. But on the other side, I mean, I would argue if you look at the publicly listed companies, the companies that went public, by now, I think based on the projections in 2016, we should have had a much larger cohort of public companies with very healthy balance sheets driving,
Yep.
a large future, financial future for the space industry. I think it'll still come, but I think the last 10 years has also not been smooth sailing. I mean, COVID affected everything in the world and space industry included.
Of course.
But geopolitics is also a good example, right? Like the last few years have been very, very chaotic. That's also shifted focus on what space is. It's also interesting because now I think you see there's a different kind of founder stepping into the space market. People who are starting space companies today have a different reason for doing it, a different motivation, different focus, different direction than 10 years ago. And that also happens as a result of the state of the world.
Indeed, and that's something to which all companies and Satsearch has to adapt, right? And has to
Yeah.
the rules that you have to play with.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's you either play it or you step out of the game. I mean, somebody that I know at a company that we had close contact with, I saw on LinkedIn recently left because they didn't like the direction that the space industry is going in, right? So you make your choices, right? So you either adapt to be in this industry as it is today, or you decide this isn't what I wanted to do. And I think with a lot of the extremes happening in the world right now, that choice is quite tangible for a lot of people. Like, is this why what I wanted to do? Is this the market I wanted to be in? Is this the job I wanted to do? Are these the kinds of applications I wanted to serve? It's a very personal choice, and yeah, you have to kind of draw your own lines around that.
Indeed. Indeed. And I think I also agree with you that now more than ever, because the shift is, I mean, it's just there and it's happening. And it's not just one company, but that it's the whole industry in a way is changing, yeah, focus or the,
Yeah,
but moving
exactly.
on and to start closing the interview, first things, have you ever spoken again with that person that said that no one would ever use the platform apart from students?
No, but I know I spoke to somebody, actually a friend who knows that person. And they said, yeah, look, people are not always right, right? So,
Of
and
course.
look, that's whatever happens with Satsearch. I feel like personally that is my biggest sense of accomplishment. That I felt that, I saw that, and I felt determined enough to say, okay, this person's stating something, and I don't know it to be true. It's not like the speed of light is constant; that it is a objective truth that can be verified.
Hmm.
So I want to know, is this true, right? Is this person right or wrong? And I feel like the commitment to do that is maybe the biggest step I took. And it just came from something that's very true to me. I feel very good about it because when I look back, I think that's the moment in which I think in the entire history of the company, I expressed who I am deep down, which is curious, a bit rebellious, and I think just determined, right? To say, look, let me find out. Like, I want to find out for myself. Like, is this person right or wrong? And I was prepared for both answers, by the way. I was prepared for the answer to be that we tried for a while and discovered that that person was right. But I guess I also had some intuition that I think they're wrong, right? Which is also what gave me that extra bit of push. So yeah, no. So I've never spoken to them before. I doubt that they even remember that moment. I
Of
don't think it
course,
was
of
a
course.
significant moment for them, but it was a
Indeed, indeed.
significant moment for me because it's maybe the thing that underpinned why I'm sitting here 10 years later with this story.
No, and it helped you challenge yourself, try to find the answer to that question, and yeah, eventually build Satsearch. So it was a good comment overall.
Yeah, no, exactly. Sometimes that's the thing, right? You don't just need people who encourage you. You need people who light a fire under you, a bit. And I'm sure there was nothing malicious intended by that
Of
comment. There
course.
was nothing. It was just simply a belief that this person had, and whatever it triggered me. It lit something in me, and yeah, sometimes you need that as well.
Okay, okay. And no, that's awesome. I hope he hears and remembers then after this. But how does the future look like for Satsearch? What in terms of competition, the growth of the industry, I guess AI as with everything.
Yeah,
How
yeah,
does the
very, very good questions. To be honest, I don't know is the most sincere answer. The more complete answer is we have a bunch of ideas. I mean, competition is a good question. When we started, there really wasn't much of that around. There was a NASA website and then one or two other websites. I think what happened is a few years into what we're doing, and especially when we figured out our business model, people started noticing, right? And then you start seeing other websites popping up, and now there's an array of other websites, which I see as more than anything a bit of like it gives me a bit of relief because it gives me a feeling, okay, we're not completely crazy. Other people were seeing what we're doing and thinking, hey, that's actually a good idea and I can do it better. And then competition is always good in that sense that it keeps you sharp, right? Like you're like, hey, like if I don't do my work well enough, somebody else is going to eat my lunch. So it keeps you sharp, it keeps you focused. So I like that. And honestly, I care more about the problem being solved. So if it turns out somebody is much better than we are at solving the problem, and they overtake us, and that search ceases to exist, and that platform becomes the de facto platform. If that means that the problem gets solved better, great, right? Like I'm not invested in I need to be the person to solve the problem. I think it's a problem worth solving, and if our existence causes somebody who's smarter than me, better than me, faster than me to put something together that solves the problem, in an improved way, great. But I also like competing, so I kind of want to see if we can continue to be ahead of the curve that way. So yeah, that's one side of it. I mean, the industry itself is very complicated because now you've got a lot of things changing in the world. Supply chains have suddenly become very normal talk, right? Like everyone talks about supply chains. Supply chains are very critical. And of course, I mean, the big elephant in the room is the fact that defense has become such a major part of the conversation for us in space. And whatever you think of that being the case, it is factually the case. And so how do you adapt to that? How do you think about positioning around that? There's things that we're thinking about with regards to that. One of the most important things is um, supply chain provenance and understanding who are you buying from, who are you selling to, are you allowed to do that, are you allowed to transact, what are the rules and regulations, what permits do you need, permissions do you need, etc. This is part
Yeah.
of a corpus of things that I think are, even into the future. My prediction is this will be very important, very critical to scaling up commercial activity in space. And so I see that we have an opportunity, to kind of make a dent in that because we're talking to both of these parties. Many of them are talking to each other via our platform as well. So if we can facilitate things like that conversation going faster and more efficiently, that we can bring to the table, things that we have understood since are very expensive in site-based companies, like a lot of this export-import control,
Yep.
licensing, comes with a very high cost. Now, can we make a dent in that? Can we figure out a way through software and the internet and algorithms and things to scale that kind of understanding? Maybe. So there's one aspect of that. The other aspect in terms of like the future of the platform is, the thing that I started with, which we've really only barely scraped to the surface of, and I think there's lots more to do, and I'm super excited about, is the tools we can build for engineers. Um, we had a master student doing a thesis with us pre-COVID to explore an idea that I have, which is now published in that thesis and in an IAC as well. And it's a term that I coined integrated mission design. And the idea was, a lot of traditional systems engineering, the process that you go through is flowing down mission goals and requirements to system level, to subsystem level, and then you do I don't know, you're the ADCS engineer and you've got a bunch of requirements and constraints and you're doing your simulations, and out of that you get an optimal design of your ADCS system, which might mean a number of reaction wheels of certain sizes and certain positions, torquers, certain sensors, etc. So you end up with like this list of all these characteristics of the ADCS system, and then you go to the market to try to shop for this, right? But it's kind of a strange way of doing it because that forces the conversation to be about like bespoke engineering and, oh, you need a reaction wheel that's got exactly this much momentum storage or whatever it is. And then you either have to accept a product in the market that's different from that and do a reanalysis, like is that sufficient, or what typically happens actually is then the supplier makes modifications and you get this non-recurring engineering cost and lead time increases and
Yeah.
etc. But my idea was, if you think of like our database or any database like that as like a box of Lego blocks, and you took those block of Lego blocks, like if you give a kid a bunch of Legos, they're not starting with a design and flowing it down and then saying, I need exactly this shape of block and that shape of block. No, they open the box and they start building with the blocks that are there. And
Of
so this
course.
concept of integrated mission design is something I'm very passionate about taking forward, which is to try to flip the systems engineering process and go the other way around and say, imagine we had this database of all these reaction wheels in the world and of all the characteristics there. If you could flow up all those solutions through the system, what kind of performance could you achieve given a certain price, lead time, etc.? So you're moving the world a little bit more towards like true COTS, commercial off the shelf.
Yep.
So on the engineering side, I'm kind of passionate about that, and that involves then integrating our database into tools and software, and enabling what I like to call like single-click operations for engineers. So these kind of like engineering integrations are an area that I'm very interested in. AI is of course part of that. So once you've done all of this, you can imagine throwing an AI of some sort on top of that and posing a very high-level question to the AI and ask it to just run through everything. There's been proposals for design engineering assistants, DEAs, and things like that. So that could be a direction we go in on the engineering side. And then on the supplier side, helping suppliers really understand the market, like a lot of analytics, a lot of experimentation tools, a lot of like data-driven tools, really so they can start quantifying ROI as well and understanding what does the market really want? Are we building the right product? How should we adapt the way we are operating in the market? We kind of have an engine for this now. A lot of like stuff that we do on the platform is in this direction of sort of market intelligence now. So yeah, this is a bit the future, for the platform. What I'm always a little cautious of is we're not a big enough team to do all of that at the same time. So we're trying to
Of course.
sequence and build a roadmap to do that. But yeah, I think I have more ideas than I think I'll probably have
Time to
years
execute on,
left
right?
before years left before retirement to do. So I think there's lots and lots of ideas of things to do.
I have to say, I really like the integrated development one because I think it would help teams build simpler missions and in a more practical way because you build based on what exists and the components that you can easily buy. So that's a very very good
Well, that's one side
solutions
of it, but
for engineers on one side, of
yeah,
course.
that's one side of it. But what my passion around that is, and this is a little extreme, maybe it'll be possible, maybe it won't, but my thinking is also this might be the way, like through something like this, that we allow people to go from idea to satellite operating in orbit in 3 months, maybe 1 month. And if you think about it right now, that's absurd, right? Like even doing it in 12 months is very hard. 24 months, 36 months is kind of like, where most small sat projects end up. And I think there's this very, very important bottleneck to be solved, which I think we have an opportunity to solve that might see that, if you build with existing building blocks, those building blocks are standardized. And then as a result of that, suppliers can standardize their processes and they can hold inventory. And you can end up with like an Amazon Prime kind of experience where you pick something, you order it, and the next day it's on your desk. And within a week, you have all your parts. And within a couple of weeks, you've done all your AIT and testing, and then you've sent it to the launch pad. And SpaceX is launching so often that, or an array of other launch vehicles. And so maybe within a month or 2 months, you've got your satellite up and it's beaming data down and your business is running. And so that's a little bit the thinking behind this IMD in the grand scheme of things. Besides the fact that I think that just from a systems engineering point of view, it's a very interesting exercise to think about.
Exactly, yeah.
And with that is, there's lots of versions of it. One of the other ones that I'm very keen on is if you're doing the structure side of it, or like the mechanical engineering, you're often dealing with a CAD model to do all your packaging, interfacing, etc. But it's generally a pain to get those CAD models into your tool. Either, to get it from the suppliers can be difficult, or to just replicate, what you need. So what we're trying to build an engine that ultimately I'm hoping we can have like in a tool like SolidWorks or CATIA or something. A plugin, you search reaction wheel, there's a bunch of options there. You drag and drop one of them, and it just auto-populates the CAD model there with material properties, moments of inertia, mass, interfaces. I mean, if you think about how much time you will save for an engineer, because I know how many engineers are
Hours.
spending time, just trying to get that into the tool, and that's not interesting engineering work, right? Getting the really interesting engineering work is to put that reaction wheel in, connect it to your Simulink simulator, run the simulation, do the analysis, do the trade-off. That's where the human brain matters, not in trying to do like all this messy work of getting data from one place to another.
Indeed, I fully agree, and please do it on behalf of plenty of engineers. Uh, so Kartik, I think we
We'll
need
try our
to
best.
please, but I think we need to wrap up. So yeah, thanks a lot for this interview. If there's anything else you want to share, of course, I guess I imagine you invite everybody to check Satsearch and log in and be a regular users of the platform. But
Yeah, no, I thank you for inviting me. Of course, yeah, if anybody is working on a project or is supplying stuff, you're welcome to come hang out on our platform. And yeah, I hope this is also something interesting for your listeners.
indeed, for sure it is. So talk soon. Thanks a lot.
Yes, thanks a lot.